Hello, and welcome to WSS News. I'm Ron Reyes.
And I'm Luke Unruh.
We have a great thrill-provoking show for you tonight and only one story.
Residential schools. They're a dark spot in our history as Canadians, but history all the same. Tonight we'll discuss the important parts. We'll explain exactly what residential schools were. We'll describe just a few of the awful ways that children were treated, and perhaps most importantly, we will consider the ripple effect, if you will, that is still very real in our modern world.
Now, many of you may have sketchy knowledge of what exactly residential schools are in some way. Have never heard of the term. Joining us, we have removed expert Stephen Wonder. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Durr.
Glad to be here, and please, call me Stevie Wan.
Tell me, Stevie Wan, what exactly were the residential schools?
When Canada was being established, the Aboriginal people of Canada were viewed as less than human, as savages even, that needed to be civilized. The residential schools were put in place to civilize Native children and teach them how to live as responsible adults.
Can you tell us why this is such a terrible thing? But it sounds like the government was trying to help these children.
The kids were taken from their families and forced to attend. The whole point of residential schools was to snuff out the Indian in these children. They were forbidden to speak their languages and practicing any part of their cultures, and they were brutally punished if they did.
So, would you say that they were discriminating against simply because of their race?
Without question, Aboriginals at the time were seen as the problem that needed to be fixed. To the Europeans, they were ignorant and needed childlike guidance in life. Brothers and sisters were separated to dissolve bonds to their culture.
Oh, thank you so much for the pleasure, Stevie Wan.
Thank you.
In our research and investigation into the history of residential schools, we at WSS1 News have uncovered some startling evidence. We have confirmed reports of many children going through terrible physical and unfortunately sexual abuse. This abuse came most often at the hands of the priests and nuns in charge of the schools and controlling the children. Some children even died. A few brave survivors have spoken out about the horrible, destructive things that they went through.
I got strapped. I got beaten up for speaking my own native tongue. I even had my tongue pulled out and pinched. Beatings. Not strapping. It's literally beatings.
My strongest memory there is when the little girl died beside me. She must have been about 6. I was scared why the parents were not there. They were never notified.
Then I spotted my sister. I was so glad and so hysteric, and I went running to her and I reached out to her. I didn't realize that we weren't supposed to know that we both lived in the same place, and we weren't allowed to speak to each other. We weren't allowed to talk to each other.
They had to be controlled, I guess, had to be contained, and so they would walk in circles, in the cafeteria, round and round and round and round, to deal with their boredom.
If children who sent to this school were lucky enough to leave relatively unharmed, they didn't have much to return to. One of the girls tells a story of how she was taken her home at the age of 6. They stayed in the school for 10 years, only leaving at the age of 16. She told us that when she returned her home, she felt like she didn't belong. She couldn't speak her own language too. And her family tradition seems strange too to her.
That's truly hard to hear, and our sympathy is with all people who went through similar ordeals. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to WSS News 1. The inhuman treatment of Aboriginal peoples is a real part of our history, but it begs the question, how is this possible in the first place?
The Indian Act was legislation put into place in 1876 and allowed the Canadian government to essentially have control over all Aboriginal peoples. It gave them legal power to assimilate the First Nations into modern culture and allowed them to do this by any means necessary. This led to the creation of residential schools, a method of civilizing a people that were viewed as ignorant savages. It allowed school teachers to completely ban any cultural practices, and many Aboriginal groups were not allowed to practice their traditional potlatches. Many of the more oppressive articles of the Act have since been repealed, but there are some laws that still remain.
In 1948, the United Nations drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which outlined the rights of all humans, regardless of age, sex, nationality, culture, or religion. Some of the articles included privileges such as the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and to manifest those beliefs in teaching and practice, the right to a full education that promotes understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and the right of parents to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. Many of these rights were violated in residential schools, as children were taken away from their families and their culture and forced to attend a school that taught them that their lives were completely wrong. Their culture and practices were forbidden, and if they so much as spoke their native language, they were cruelly beaten and humiliated. WSS News 1 will be back after this short break. Now we'll go to our residential school expert, John Smith, to give us a picture of what's been done to apologize for what has happened.
Okay, thank you, Luke. The atrocities committed by the Canadian government during the era of residential schools in Canada are easily the worst thing that the government has done to people of Canada. In the last 10 years or so, there have been many formal apologies from various governing bodies and churches. On June 11, 2008, Prime Minister of Canada at the time, Stephen Harper, formally apologized on behalf of the Canadian government and took time to recognize the survivors of the many residential schools. Let's take a look.
Mr. Speaker, I stand before you today to offer an apology to former students of Indian residential schools. The treatment of children in Indian residential schools is a sad chapter in our history. Two primary objectives of the residential school system were to remove and isolate children from the influence of their home, families, traditions, and cultures, and to assimilate them into the dominant culture. These objectives were based on the assumption that Aboriginal cultures and spiritual beliefs were inferior and unequal. Today, we recognize that this policy of assimilation was wrong, has caused great harm, and has no place in our country. The absence of an apology has been an impediment to healing and reconciliation. Therefore, on behalf of the Government of Canada and all Canadians, I stand before you in this chamber so vital, so central to our existence as a country, to apologize to Aboriginal peoples for the role the Government of Canada played in the Indian residential schools.
The following year, in 2009, Pope Benedict XVI and the Vatican apologized for the Church's role in the residential school saga. Now, in just the last year, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee has made 94 calls to action, and the province of Ontario has embraced all of them. Although there have been many apologies made by governments and prominent figures, there still has much healing to be done.
Thanks so much for that insight, John.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Bye now.
Glad to have you here.
Tonight we have told a terrible story and revealed things about Canada's past that many people have refused to acknowledge in the past.
People have been exerting power and influence over each other for as long as humans have lived. And the residential schools are just one example of that, though it is very close to home. We can only hope that our government will take the steps necessary to show that Canadians are truly sorry for what they've done.
This has been WSS 1 News. Thanks for the sponsor, Fire Extinguisher, because we're too lit. Good night.